What does it actually cost to live in a city that keeps getting called Europe's most underrated capital? Ljubljana shows up on almost every 2026 list of hidden gem destinations. Small, green, walkable, safer than most Western capitals. But underrated is a marketing word, not a financial one. This episode pulls apart what a euro actually buys here in 2026 across 5 categories: cost of living, real estate, transport, healthcare, and visas, for 2 very different groups of people living in the same city. Ljubljana is Slovenia's capital, home to roughly 280,000 people, smaller than many single neighborhoods in other European capitals. Slovenia joined the EU in 2004, adopted the euro in 2007, and entered the Schengen area the same year, which means the country's entire modern economic identity is built around European integration rather than the kind of accession-in-progress story you'd hear in Belgrade or Tirana. It sits wedged between Austria, Italy, Croatia, and Hungary. That geography matters. The Alps are an hour away, the Adriatic coast about 90 minutes. It's compact enough to cross on foot in under 30 minutes, which shapes almost every cost category in this episode, starting with transport. Like Belgrade and Tirana in this series, Ljubljana really runs on 2 parallel economies. One is built on Slovenian salaries, taxed and spent locally. The other is built on foreign, euro-denominated income, remote work, freelance contracts, foreign pensions, employer-sponsored relocation packages. That lands in the same rental market and the same grocery stores, but starts from a completely different income floor. Slovenia recently gave that second economy an official legal category, which is where the visa section of this episode begins, and where the 2 economies split most sharply on paper. Start with the simpler half: EU, EEA, and Swiss citizens. They can enter and live in Slovenia with no visa at all, using only a national ID or passport for any purpose: work, self-employment, study, or simply relocating. For the first 3 months, no registration is required. Stay longer, and you register for a residence certificate at the local administrative unit, the Upravna enota, valid for up to 5 years and renewable under the same conditions. If you work, are self-employed, or provide services in Slovenia, you're also exempt from proving health insurance or sufficient funds separately. The employment itself satisfies that requirement. For everyone else, including most of this channel's audience, the starting point is the Schengen 9180 rule: up to 90 days of visa-free travel within any rolling 180-day period, with a mandatory ETIS pre-travel authorization expected to become mandatory later in 2026. That covers tourism, not relocation. To legally stay and work remotely beyond 90 days, non-EU nationals need one of a handful of specific residence permits. And until recently, Slovenia didn't have one built for remote workers at all, which left a real gap compared to neighbors like Croatia. That changed on November 21st, 2025, when Slovenia launched its Digital Nomad Permit, officially a temporary residence permit under Article 51A of the Foreigners Act, the Zakon o Tuji, following a 2024 amendment, becoming the 17th European country with a dedicated remote work route. It's administered jointly by the Ministry of the Interior, local administrative units, and Slovenian consulates abroad, and it's aimed squarely at non-EU, non-EEA nationals who want to base themselves in Slovenia while earning from abroad, without going through a traditional work visa sponsor. The rules are strict about the one thing that matters most: your income has to come from outside Slovenia. That means a foreign employer or freelance and business clients based abroad. You are explicitly barred from working for a Slovenian company or invoicing Slovenian clients on this permit. The moment local income enters the picture, you need a different visa category entirely. The big structural difference from an ordinary work visa is that no Slovenian employer or sponsor is required at all. You only need to prove the income exists, not that it's tied to a Slovenian entity. The income bar is set at twice Slovenia's average net monthly salary, recalculated each year by the National Statistics Office, SURS. For 2026, that lands around 3,080 to 3,200 euros a month, depending on which update you catch. For comparison, that's meaningfully higher than Croatia's roughly 2,540 euros or Spain's 2,849, and broadly in line with Portugal's €3,510 threshold, well below Germany or Estonia's requirements. But Slovenia is not positioning itself as the cheapest entry point on this list of 17 countries. Applying means gathering a fairly standard immigration file, passport valid at least 3 months beyond your stay, a biometric photo, proof of remote income, an employment contract or client agreements, proof of accommodation such as a lease or hotel booking, health insurance, and a clean criminal record certificate from your home country and anywhere you've lived long-term. The administrative fee runs around €100 to €130 plus translation costs, and processing typically takes 1 to 3 months. Family members, spouses, registered partners, dependent children can join as dependents, but each must register separately, and none of them can work for a Slovenian employer either. Here's where the sources genuinely disagree, and we'd rather flag that than paper over it. Most guides describe the permit as strictly non-renewable. After 12 months, you must leave and wait a minimum of 6 months before reapplying, and this permit doesn't count toward the years needed for permanent residency or citizenship at all. At least one source describes it differently, as renewable once for up to 2 years total. Given the program only launched in November 2025, there simply isn't enough real-world renewal data yet to say which reading will hold in practice. Anyone relying on this permit long-term should treat the 12-month, non-renewable version as the safer planning assumption and build a backup plan around it. Tax residency follows the standard EU logic. Spend more than 183 days in Slovenia in a calendar year, or otherwise establish your center of life there, and you become a Slovenian tax resident on worldwide income, taxed on a progressive scale running from 16 up to 50% across 5 brackets, one of the steeper curves in Europe. Stay under that threshold, and only Slovenian source income is taxable, which for most digital nomad permit holders is zero by design, since the entire point of the permit is foreign-sourced earnings. The common strategy among nomads elsewhere in Europe: spend 5 to 6 months in Slovenia, the rest elsewhere in Schengen or beyond, applies here too. And it's the difference between a genuinely tax-light year and a 50% top bracket. For non-EU nationals who want something more permanent than a 12-month permit, the common workaround is forming a Slovenian limited liability company, a DOO, with a minimum share capital of €7,500, then having that company sponsor your residence permit as an employee. It typically requires demonstrating real business activity, often framed as roughly €10,000 in revenue within the first 6 months, or hiring a Slovenian citizen. It's a heavier lift than the digital nomad permit, involving accounting, corporate tax filings, and ongoing compliance, but it opens a path the nomad route explicitly does not: permanent residency and eventually citizenship down the line. There's a third path worth mentioning for anyone who lands a real job offer rather than bringing foreign income: the single permit, and not no doppelgäng, which combines a work permit and residence permit into one document. A Slovenian employer initiates the application with the Employment Service of Slovenia, which usually runs a labor market test unless the role is exempt. Highly qualified positions under the EU Blue Card scheme skip that step. The single permit is valid for 1 year, renewable annually, and unlike the digital nomad permit, time spent on it does count toward permanent residency. The EU Blue Card itself requires a recognized university degree and, in 2026, an annual salary of at least roughly €44,300, a high bar, but one that opens a genuinely faster track for senior professionals. Now to housing, where the two economies actually meet in the same buildings. Slovenia has unusually high homeownership, which has historically kept the rental sector small and thin. In Ljubljana specifically, the rental vacancy rate sits at around just 3%, a genuinely tight market, not a marketing exaggeration, and one where well-priced apartments in good condition typically rent out within 2 to 4 weeks of listing. Citywide, a one-bedroom apartment averages somewhere between €650 and €750 a month in the center, and closer to €500 to €650 outside it, though estimates vary widely. One property data site puts the citywide one-bedroom average nearer €980 based on 40 to 55 square meter units, with most listings falling between €750 and €1,250. That spread alone tells you something. Ljubljana's rental data is noisier than Belgrade's or Tirana's, likely because the sample of available listings is genuinely small in a market this size. Neighborhood matters enormously here, more than it did in Belgrade or Tirana. Center, Trnovo, and Inner Bezigrad command the highest prices, with young professionals in these walkable, cafe-dense areas often paying 800 to 1,200 euros for a one-bedroom or small two-bedroom. Siska and Vic, both popular with students and academics near the university, run noticeably cheaper, roughly 450 to 800 euros for a one-bedroom. Most in Outer Siska hold the cheapest one-bedroom rents in the city, while families tend to gravitate toward Košice, Vic, and residential pockets of Siska for more space and a calmer pace than the center offers. A studio typically runs 500 to 600 euros, a two-bedroom 700 to 950 euros in the center. Furnished units carry roughly a 10 to 15% premium over unfurnished ones. Renters should expect to pay a security deposit, called a varsina, usually equal to 1 month's rent, a standard European norm, but worth budgeting for on top of the first month, alongside any agency fee if you go through a rental agency rather than dealing with a landlord directly. On top of rent, basic utilities for an 85 square meter apartment, electricity, heating, cooling, water, garbage, run somewhere in the 150 to 200 euro range per month, with one estimate running notably higher at over 300 euros. Heating costs swing seasonally given Ljubljana's cold winters, and older, poorly insulated buildings in the historic center can push that figure up further. Groceries for a single person average around 250 to 300 euros a month, and a basic mobile plus internet package adds roughly 50 euros. Day-to-day lifestyle costs sit in familiar Central European territory. A coffee in a cafe runs around 2 euros, a mid-range restaurant meal for two averages roughly 68 euros, and a monthly gym membership costs around 41 euros. A cinema ticket runs about 8 euros, an hour of weekend tennis court rental around 19 euros. None of these are dramatic outliers next to Vienna or Munich, but they land noticeably above what the earlier Belgrade and Tirana episodes reported for the same categories. Total monthly cost of living for a single person is where estimators genuinely diverge, from as low as roughly 1,070 euros, including rent on the budget end, up to around 1,800 to 2,050 euros on estimates that assume a more comfortable, centrally located lifestyle. We're presenting that as a range rather than a single number, because collapsing it into one figure would misrepresent how differently people actually live here. A student in shared housing in Vic and a remote worker in a central one-bedroom are, financially speaking, living in two different cities. For a family of four, monthly costs including rent range from roughly 3,500 to 4,000 euros, depending on the source and neighborhood. Private kindergarten alone averages around 550 euros a month, often rivaling rent as a single line item, and worth factoring in early if you're relocating with young children. Public kindergartens exist and cost far less, but spots are limited and typically prioritize registered residents, so relying on one from day one of a relocation is risky. Now to buying, for anyone thinking past renting. Ljubljana apartments sell at an average of around 4,750 euros per square meter, putting a typical 65 square meter two-bedroom at roughly 310,000 euros. The median apartment price across the city sits near 270,000 euros. The average, pulled upward by luxury sales, is closer to 320,000 euros. New-build homes carry a premium of roughly 15% per square meter over existing properties, largely due to energy efficiency standards and modern layouts. Neighborhood by neighborhood, roughly 273,000 euros, about $300,000, buys a 50 to 65 square meter one or two bedroom in Bezigrad or most, or a renovated one bedroom of 45 to 55 square meters in a better part of Siska. Step up to around 455,000 euros and you're looking at an 80 to 95 square meter family apartment in Vic, a renovated two-bedroom in Trnovo, or a small row house in Rudnik. At the top end, roughly 900,000 euros buys a high-end apartment at the edge of center or a detached house with a garden in Rudnik or Vic. The true luxury tier, villas in Rosna Dolina, starts well above 1.8 million euros. Entry-level buyers can find small studios or one-bedrooms of 25 to 35 square meters in outer neighborhoods like Polj or parts of most Polj for roughly 120,000 to 180,000 euros. On top of the purchase price, budget for Slovenia's real estate transfer tax of 2% when VAT doesn't apply, plus notary and registration costs. Buyers typically negotiate around 6% off the listing price. So a property advertised at 300,000 euros often closes closer to 282,000 euros. For anyone treating Ljubljana as an investment rather than a home, mortgage interest rates for buyers currently sit around 3.5% annually, and gross rental yields across the city generally fall between 3 and 5%. Prime central locations yield less, around 2.7 to 3.6%, because purchase prices there are so high relative to achievable rent. The stronger yields, in the 4.2 to 5.2% range, tend to show up in solidly connected but less glamorous pockets like Novi Jars in Most or Savsko Naselje in Bezigrad, where purchase prices stay moderate but tenant demand from students and young professionals remains steady. Prices have climbed roughly 6% over the past year despite fewer transactions, a classic sign of tight supply meeting sustained demand, and nearly doubled, up about 95% over the past decade. Gentrifying pockets like Siska, Most, and the Smartinska corridor have seen renovated small flats rise 12 to 25% over just the past 2 to 3 years. For non-EU buyers, ownership generally has to go through that same DOO company structure mentioned earlier, since direct personal ownership faces restrictions that EU citizens don't encounter. Transportation is where Ljubljana's small size actually pays off. The entire public transit system, buses, the Castle funicular, and the Bicycle bike share, runs through a single contactless card called Urbana, which costs €2 to buy and can hold up to €50 of credit. Buses cover roughly 93% of the urban area, meaning most households sit within about 500 meters of a stop, and the network of 85 bus lines reaches suburbs as well as the center. A single bus fare runs 1.30 to 1.50 euros depending on payment method, valid for 90 minutes with unlimited transfers if paid via the Urbana card. Paying by contactless bank card instead skips that transfer window. Students get a subsidized monthly pass for around 20 euros, while regular commuters can buy monthly, semi-annual, or annual passes loaded onto the green version of the card. Fares tend to be somewhat lower on weekends, and the green Urbana card doubles as a Ljubljana City Library membership card at no extra cost. Bicycle, the city bike share, is practically free to use. Registration costs just €1 for a week or €3 for a year, and any ride under 60 minutes costs nothing at all, with roughly 38 stations spread across the city. Combined with a compact, walkable center, many residents, local and foreign, go without a car entirely, which quietly removes one of the biggest cost categories other European cities force on new arrivals. No fuel, no parking fees, no vehicle insurance or annual road tax. For anyone who does want a car or needs to leave the city for day trips, the numbers are worth knowing. Ljubljana Airport sits about 26 kilometers north of the city. A private transfer into the center runs roughly 40 to 50 euros, while the public bus is far cheaper at around 5 to 15 euros, though slower. Fuel currently runs about 1.65 euros a liter for regular gasoline, and a weekly highway vignette, mandatory for any driving on Slovenia's motorways, costs around 16 euros. Central parking in Zone 1 runs roughly 3 to 4 euros an hour. A popular day trip worth budgeting for. Ljubljana to Lake Bled. The Arriva bus runs every 30 minutes and costs roughly 6 to 8 euros for the 54-minute ride. The scenic train to Les Bled runs about the same price range, but takes closer to an hour, with an extra short bus or taxi to the actual lakeside. A rental car for the day starts around 10 to 30 euros before fuel and vignette. None of these numbers are large individually, but for anyone treating Ljubljana as a base for exploring the rest of Slovenia, which is a real part of its appeal, they add up over a year. Healthcare runs on a compulsory public insurance system managed by ZZS, the Health Insurance Institute of Slovenia, funded by combined employer and employee contributions of roughly 13.45% of gross salary. It covers general practitioner visits, specialist referrals, hospital care, and emergencies, but not comprehensively. Co-payments apply to many services, which is where the second layer of insurance comes in. Slovenia's roughly 29 hospitals, including 18 general facilities, are distributed such that nearly every location in the country sits within 20 kilometers of a primary healthcare center. Most residents, Slovenian and foreign alike, carry supplementary insurance, dopolnilno zdravstveno zavarovanje, to cover that co-payment gap, typically running 35 to 50 euros a month through providers like Vzajemna, Triglav, or Generali Slovenia. Without it, the out-of-pocket share on some treatments can reach 10 to 25% of the cost. A 2026 policy update also raised the income threshold for reduced-rate premiums, which helps lower-income residents specifically, though it doesn't change much for anyone earning at the average salary or above. For faster access, Ljubljana has a growing private clinic scene. Sante, IMI Ljubljana, and others, where a GP consultation runs 60 to 120 euros and specialist appointments are typically available within days rather than the weeks common in the public system, which does struggle with waiting times partly due to an aging population. Dental care is largely private across the board, with a basic checkup and clean running roughly 60 to 100 euros. International corporate providers like International SOS and Global Doctors also maintain a presence in Ljubljana, mainly serving relocated employees. Digital Nomad Permit holders are not automatically enrolled in ZZS. They're required to carry private or international health insurance from the outset, with plans from providers like Signa, Allianz Care, or AXA running roughly 200 to 600 euros a year, and repatriation cover is worth checking for specifically, since it's not always included by default. Travel-style medical plans marketed at nomads, such as Safety Wing, can also satisfy the requirement, though they're generally lighter coverage than a full international plan. Now back to the two economies, with real numbers. Slovenia's average gross monthly salary in 2026 sits around 2,300 to 2,600 euros, translating to a net take-home of roughly 1,550 to 1,600 euros after social contributions and progressive income tax. Ljubljana carries a wage premium over the national average, but a notably small one, around 10 to 15%, versus 25 to 35% in Belgrade or 30 to 40% in Bucharest. That compression is actually a defining feature of Slovenia's labor market. It has the lowest income inequality in the entire European Union, on par with Denmark. Sector still matters, though. Pharma, anchored by companies like Krka and Lek, pays the highest sector average at roughly 3,650 euros gross, about 52% above the national mean, with senior regulatory and R&D roles reaching 8,000 to 12,000 euros. IT sits close behind. At the other end, retail and hospitality workers typically earn closer to the minimum wage, which means the gap between a senior pharma scientist and a Ljubljana cafe worker is genuinely wide, even inside a country famous for wage compression. One more honest caveat belongs here, on the minimum wage specifically. Official sources for 2026 genuinely disagree. Some report the gross minimum wage rising sharply to 1,481.88 euros a month, an 18% jump from 2025, while at least one other tracker shows it holding flat at 1,277.72 euros. We couldn't fully reconcile the two figures from public sources, and we'd rather tell you that than quote one as fact. If the minimum wage matters to your planning, this is a case where checking the Ministry of Labor's own site directly, at the point you actually need the number, beats relying on any single secondary source, including this one. That compression is what makes the next number land differently than it would elsewhere. A Ljubljana net salary of roughly 1,700 to 1,750 euros a month, applying that 10 to 15% capital premium, sits right in the middle of, or sometimes below, the 1,800 to 2,050 euro cost of living estimates for a comfortable single-person lifestyle in the same city. For a fair share of working Ljubljana residents, the math on a comfortable, centrally located life doesn't fully close on a local salary alone. Now place the Digital Nomad Permit's income floor next to that. roughly 3,080 to 3,200 euros a month. That's close to double the average local net salary, and comfortably above even the higher cost of living estimates. By design, the permit doesn't let in anyone earning close to what an average Ljubljana resident earns. It's built for a different income bracket entirely, closer to what a senior pharma scientist or IT specialist earns locally than what a typical service sector employee takes home. Picture a local case study. A mid-level Slovenian professional earning the Ljubljana average of around 1,700 euros net, renting a one-bedroom outside the center in Siska or Vic for 600 euros, spending 280 on groceries, 180 on utilities and phone, 41 on a gym membership, 20 on a monthly transit pass. That leaves roughly 580 euros for everything else: savings, healthcare co-payments, dining out, and the unavoidable cost creep of city life. Buying an apartment on this salary alone, without family help or a partner's income, would take well over a decade of full saving even before accounting for a mortgage. Now the remote income case. Someone on the Digital Nomad Permit earning the 3,200 euro minimum, renting a one-bedroom in the center for 700 euros, paying roughly 40 euros a month for international health insurance, 300 on groceries, with a bit more dining out at 68 euros a meal for two, 200 in utilities and connectivity, plus the occasional weekend trip to Bled for around 60 to 90 euros round trip. That leaves roughly 1,850 euros of discretionary income, more than 3 times what the local case study has left over, on a rental budget for the exact same apartment type. Both of these people are competing for apartments in a rental market with roughly a 3% vacancy rate. That's the mechanical link between the two economies. It isn't that remote workers and locals live in separate cities. They're bidding on the same limited stock of one-bedrooms in Sinter, Bezigrad, and Vic, with very different amounts of leftover income to make that bid with. And landlords in a tight market have every incentive to favor the higher, more reliable foreign income. Beyond the numbers, quality of life is genuinely part of the calculation here. Ljubljana consistently ranks among Europe's safer, greener capitals, walkable center, extensive parks like Tivoli, and a size that makes daily life logistically simple in a way larger capitals rarely offer. That's not a cost line item, but it's a real factor in why people who can afford the choice keep choosing this city over cheaper alternatives, and why locals who could earn more elsewhere in Europe often stay anyway. One honest caveat on climate: Ljubljana winters are genuinely cold, regularly dropping below freezing, with heating costs rising accordingly through the colder months. For anyone drawn here chasing a year-round mild weather fantasy, that expectation doesn't match reality. This is a Central European climate, not a Mediterranean one, despite the coastal access 90 minutes away. Summers, by contrast, can be warm and genuinely pleasant, which is part of why the shoulder seasons are when the city photographs best. A second honest caveat, this time on the visa itself. The Digital Nomad Permit is barely 8 months old at the time of this recording. There simply isn't a large body of real applicant experience yet, on approval timelines, on how strictly income proof gets scrutinized, or on how the renewal question from earlier actually plays out in practice. Early adopter risk is real here. Even if the legal framework looks solid on paper, and the government itself has hinted at further simplification, which means the rules you read today could look different a year from now. A third caveat, on the cost of living data itself. Estimates for Ljubljana diverge more than they did for Belgrade or Tirana, single-person budgets ranging from roughly 1,070 to 2,050 euros a month, depending on the source. Part of that is methodology. Part of it is the genuinely small, thin rental market producing noisier data. Treat every number in this episode as a range to plan around, not a fixed price tag, and recheck the specific figures that matter most to your own plans closer to the time you'd actually move. Where does Ljubljana sit next to its neighbors? It's meaningfully cheaper than Vienna or Munich, both under 2 hours away by car. It's pricier than Zagreb, and noticeably pricier than Belgrade or Tirana from earlier episodes in this series. The trade-off being EU membership, Eurozone stability, and a functioning digital nomad legal pathway that Serbia and Albania don't yet offer in the same form. For someone weighing all 4 cities purely on cost, Ljubljana sits closer to the Western European end of this series than any city we've covered so far. So is Ljubljana Europe's most underrated capital? The label survives contact with the data, but only for a specific kind of person. Someone earning well above the local average, comfortable with a genuinely new and untested visa category, and willing to accept cold winters in exchange for safety, walkability, and alpine to Adriatic geography. For someone earning a Slovenian salary in a 3% vacancy rental market, the picture is a lot more ordinary. A solid, low-inequality European capital, not a bargain, and one where buying a home on a local paycheck alone remains genuinely difficult. Two people, same city, same rental listings, very different starting points. That's not a reason to avoid Ljubljana. It's just the honest math behind the postcard. Whether that math works for you depends entirely on which side of it you're standing on.